This is a near century-long story of violence and 75 years to be exact, of violence and very well-documented crimes against humanity, war crimes.
The MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa, we have been bombarded by what's going on in Gaza and in Palestine for a very long time. We grew up with this conflict. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We grew up with it. It was very well documented. It was very heavily mediatized, constantly. Seeing with our own two eyes ever since we were children. Like, it's difficult to receive all of that information from a very young age and then grow up to not care or to be like, oh.
Be neutral. It's not about racism. It's not about anti-Semitism. It's very much about
human rights.
Exactly. As simple as
coexistence and not trampling on an entire population.
On June 12th, a UN investigation concluded that Israel has committed war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. Israel refuted these claims, calling them systemic anti-Israel discrimination. However, the same reports also found that Hamas committed war crimes and crimes against humanity on October 7th.
But Israel has been committing war crimes since October 7th for 8 months.
That's 250 days.
Yikes.
And that's on nuance.
Yeah. But we also saw that the UN Security Council voted on a truce deal that was tabled by the U.S. It was outlined by U.S. President Joe Biden last week. It's a 3-phase truce deal, hostage for ceasefire. Hamas responded positively to the deal, and they did propose some amendments, according to sources. But U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken currently is in Qatar to continue negotiating, and hopefully the deal is going to go through. Do you think that this is our first step towards a lasting ceasefire and an end to the current violence in Gaza?
I would love to be optimistic and say wholeheartedly that yes, but at the end of the day, as we all know, this is a near century-long story of violence and 75 years to be exact, of violence and very well-documented crimes against humanity, war crimes. But more from a more contemporary perspective, Hamas has been accepting proposal after proposal, and it is mostly the Israeli side that has been refusing deals back and forth. The fact that this was a not a straightforward ceasefire, that it was proposed by the United States in the Security Council, that it was a truce, and again, not a ceasefire, truce for an eventual ceasefire towards the last phase, is the reason why it went through the Security Council, obviously, because the United States has been blocking immediate ceasefire resolutions.
Over jargon, most of the time.
Well, it's heavy. It's a jargon with heavy implications, legal implications, and so on. An immediate ceasefire would mean that Israel would be bound, at least not necessarily by force, but would be bound by responsibility to stop all aggression, whereas a truce deal for an eventual ceasefire gives it some leeway.
It's a 3-phase truce deal. It's going to take at least 6 months to hopefully reach a lasting ceasefire.
Yeah, 6 months is being very optimistic. Yeah.
It's difficult to be optimistic, and we're happy for the prospect of a ceasefire and the prospect of an end to the current aggressions, but it's very difficult for us to be very excited and
or hopeful.
Because especially for us in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa, we have been bombarded by what's going on in Gaza and in Palestine for a very long time. We grew up with this conflict. We grew up with it. It was very well documented. It was very heavily mediatized constantly. However, we're seeing that today, I feel like the international community is also waking up
Mm-hmm.
to the extent of Israel's violence and aggressions in Gaza.
Yes, there is a very clear distinction between people like us from either North Africa, the Middle East, or overall just the global South, who have been almost forcibly educated on the Palestinian cause, in contrast to the West. There has been a sort of media monopoly that was broken down thanks to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And people are just now realizing that the extent of what happens in Palestine and in Israel is harrowing.
Yeah.
No matter who you're rooting for, it is harrowing to see.
The images that we're seeing on a daily basis on social media, massacre after massacre, hundreds of Palestinians killed very lightly.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that was a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of Westerners,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people, whether they be younger people or older people. And you mentioned this earlier, like you see that people who are in their 50s and 60s
Mm-hmm.
that are shocked and surprised because of what they see over a situation that has been ongoing since they were children.
Mm-hmm. They were shielded from it in a way that us weren't. And so while many celebrate truce deals and divestment announcements and so on, but today many of us are getting information directly from people in the Strip,
Yeah.
in the West Bank,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like that's what's making a huge difference this time around.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I feel like the reason why we're also a little apprehensive is because a ceasefire did exist. I mean, there have been ceasefires over the past 75 years, as recently as 2021, when the aggressions in the West Bank neighborhood Sheikh Jarrah were happening. Dozens of Palestinians were evicted from their homes. Others were threatened with eviction.
Mm-hmm.
And it eventually led into protests in the West Bank and in Gaza, which leads to police violence, bombings eventually, and 260 Palestinians were killed in a span of a week, including 66 children.
And this is way before October 7th.
Exactly.
Like years before.
It has been ongoing for years.
Yeah. The fact that this time the victims of violence in the region were Israelis on October 7th is what initially put the spotlight on what's going on right now, because if it were the other way around, it would be just another day.
Just another
right?
day,
Just
exactly.
it's definitely interesting timing, but I feel like there's definitely a divide in how Western audiences or receive news about what's going on versus us in the Arab world, in North Africa, and so on.
If anything, that also bleeds into how European countries and Western countries in general responded to the current situation in Gaza. Initially, after October 7, there was an expected and homogenous response from the Western world. Do you condemn Hamas? Israel has a right to exist. Israel has a right to defend itself. That was the expected response. That's what we got. But after 8 months, today we are noticing that that's slowly changing, not just in Western societies, but also from their governments. We have, European countries that are currently recognizing Palestinian statehood, which is a milestone in the Palestinian
A huge deal.
Yeah.
A huge deal. For years, there has been immense diplomatic efforts in order to get at least one European country to recognize Palestine. And to see this come to a fruition, despite it having come as a result of so many deaths,
unfortunately,
so many, but at the same time, it's probably the one thing that, the one positive thing that truly could give us hope. Because this is also Morocco's very firm stance, is that no justice will ever occur in the region without Palestinian statehood. And so seeing so many countries from the West, politicians, notable figures come out and voice support for this specific point is probably one of the few things that we could be optimistic about and hold on to at this time.
Yeah, and just to add on to how people are responding in the West to this situation, we also see that in the U.S., they're currently in a presidential election that's coming up, and U.S. President Biden, his re-election is threatened. It's under threat currently because of the U.S.'s unconditional support for Israel. And I feel like the U.S. government is starting to feel the heat. They're starting to feel the pressure that, we might not actually get reelected into office again if we don't actually do something about this.
There would have probably never been a U.S. proposed truce deal at the Security Council if it weren't. Yeah. If pressure, be it the youth, be it student encampments, be it protests, be it even celebrities, artists, very influential figures in the United States speaking up for Palestinian rights. I am very, very confident that social pressure in the U.S. at least is working. It is showing its results. Will it amount to, how will it affect the U.S. presidential election? We don't know. But pressure is definitely being felt, especially since they are in the middle of a presidential election campaign. Also, I believe that in tandem with social pressure, something that could be influencing the U.S.'s decision right now is the mounting evidence and documentation coming up from the UN, like we mentioned earlier, with the investigation that is condemning the crimes against humanity in Gaza, with also the recent Israeli cabinet resignations. I mean, there is a plethora of steps that international organizations, NGOs, and so on are taking in order to, that could be pressuring the United States to want to see an end to the ongoing violence. UN agencies have also been very instrumental in verifying a lot of reports that came out of Gaza since October 7, whether it be Israeli reports or Hamas reports. And they have also been very important in verifying and debunking certain claims that came from Israel about what's going on in Gaza that Israel was using to justify its questionably proportionate response in the strip, which, as you said, is adding to the mounting pressure on Israel, on the U.S., on Israel allies to actually take proactive steps to end the current violence in Gaza. I mean, again, we are faced with what has been happening for, like we said, decades, but has not been this obvious to most people, which is the war of information, right? I mean, so many Israeli and Palestinian stories have gone unverified and are now part of our history. We have no way of necessarily verifying them today, but that's not the case now, right? Like, we have that ability to verify everything, be it through the UN, be it through, for instance, with the 40 beheaded baby story. I mean, that was very easily verifiable without any international agencies or whatsoever, which later on they came and confirmed that that was a fake news report, that this had never happened.
But what we can be sure of, and what we see on a daily basis, is the massive scale, the humanitarian crisis currently going on in Gaza.
Undeniable. Yeah. No one will ever question the carnage that's going on.
We're seeing it unfold with our own two eyes.
Yeah, exactly. And even this is where I think a lot of my personal hope comes from, is when you see, for instance, Jewish Voices for Peace, who are doing an amazing job in the United States at bringing lights on the suffering of the as the people who are besieged and have been besieged for a long time.
And the fact that it's coming from a Jewish organization is very important.
It's so powerful.
Because we're seeing a lot of responses to criticism of what Israel is doing being called anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Whereas you have certain Jewish organizations, Jewish people coming out and speaking out against these anti-Semitism claims. And actually, like you said, bringing light on the plight of the Palestinian people that has been ongoing for 75 years. It's a very powerful thing.
I think the use or the uneducated use of anti-Semitism and the defensive sort of use of that word and that accusation makes it so much harder to distinguish between true anti-Semitism that hurts Jewish communities, not necessarily Israelis, but just Jewish communities all over the world. And it's doing a huge disfavor to Jewish people everywhere. And I think that organization, that's where its power resides, is that it breaks this myth, which again, us North Africans, Middle Easterns have always known, which is that, especially Moroccans, which is that Jewish does not mean Zionist. And I feel like the West is just waking up to that fact. I mean, in Morocco, we have historically have had an incredibly important and foundational Jewish community in this country. And in no way, shape, or form was that ever a problem or and so calling all anti-Zionists anti-Semitic is a tactic that has been used for decades now, since the creation of Israel. And I feel like that's why it's so important to hear from Jewish voices when it comes to what's currently going on.
And the scale of the humanitarian crisis today is immense. It's heartbreaking, honestly, seeing swaths of the Gaza Strip just completely destroyed. I mean, Israel has dropped more bombs on the Strip in, 8 months than Russia dropped on Ukraine for like over a year, than certain bombings that happened in Germany in World War II. And we have to keep in mind that this is a very small area, that's the most densely populated area in the entire world. And it has been at the receiving end of massive bombing campaigns, a lot of violence, even in safe zones. This is what's mind-blowing. Even Israeli designated safe zones in the Strip where people are told to evacuate are being attacked. As recently as last week, we saw what happened in the Nusayrat refugee camp. Hundreds of people died in a refugee camp. The area is completely being decimated. That's why I feel like we're seeing such a massive response from the Western world, because you can't deny what's going on. You can't deny the videos that we saw from Nusayrat, that we saw from the Gaza bombing, the Gaza hospital bombing,
from the Rafah
earlier in the conflict, from the Rafah bombing. You can't deny it. You can't deny that what's happening is a humanitarian crisis. It's war crimes.
It's crimes against humanity.
Yeah.
However, they are being currently sort of emboldened with public support, right? Because before there was very little public support, or you would get public support from Arabs and the Muslim community globally, and that was looked at as
obviously. I mean,
yeah.
The similarities between us, we share a religion, we share a language to a certain extent. We, of course, the Arabs are going to be on the side of the Palestinians.
Exactly.
That was the general idea. But now I feel like this myth is being broken. Like, we're not just supportive of the Palestinian cause because we're also Arab, we're also Muslim, we speak Arabic.
It doesn't mean anything.
It's because it's a humanitarian crisis.
It's because we've known
war crimes that we have been seeing with our own 2 eyes ever since we were children. Like, it's difficult to receive all of that information from a very young age and then grow up to not care or to be like, oh,
be neutral.
Exactly. You can't be neutral. If you're neutral while receiving all of this information, then you're on the side of the oppressor.
Exactly.
There's no such thing as neutrality in this case.
Exactly. And I feel like Morocco's position regarding very firm and unwavering
For a very long time.
Historically,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Palestinian statehood and the respect of the Palestinians' dignity and basic human rights have been Morocco's only demand, and also a condition for possible involvement in peacekeeping efforts, as we saw in recent reports. And Moroccan society's very deeply rooted support for the Palestinian cause. I don't think I have seen, and I think it's been documented officially, that Morocco has had the largest count of Gaza solidarity protests since October 7th, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
There is a huge show of support by Moroccan society towards
a popular show of support, not just
manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't know what it is. I mean, I feel it too, but I don't know what it is that makes Moroccans feel so strongly.
I mean, King Mohammed VI is the chair of the Jerusalem Committee. That our culture is rooted in pro-Palestinian sentiment from a very, very long time, which goes back to what we were talking about, the reception of the information coming out of Gaza and the West Bank and Jerusalem for decades. You can't receive all of that and not be pro-Palestinian and not be rooted in pro-Palestinian sentiment.
Of course, yes. Especially also with sort of like historic and documented positive case of coexistence throughout its history. I feel like Morocco truly understands that it is not a religious issue. It is not a racist issue.
It's not an ethnicity issue.
Exactly.
That's not
I
what
feel
it
like
is.
Morocco is one of the most diverse nations in North Africa and the Middle East in terms of demographics and so on. And I feel like we feel strongly that it's not about racism. It's not about anti-Semitism. It's very much about
human rights.
Exactly. As simple as
coexistence and not trampling on an entire population based on a manufactured religious conflict, you know?
None of this is religious, honestly. No one thinks it's religious at this point.
You would be surprised.
I'm not talking about, extremely indoctrinated people.
Yeah.
No one thinks it's a religious issue.
Absolutely.
And even if it were, we're not going to talk about religion because that's not what this is. Because there are Christians who are being prosecuted.
Exactly.
In Israel, in the West Bank, there are
churches that are being decimated as
everywhere.
Much as mosques.
Exactly. There are illegal settlements everywhere. UN condemned illegal settlements, right? It's not us Arabs saying it. They're
literally illegal.
Illegal.
By international
law.
Yeah.
So, I feel like, and also like I will forever be amazed at Moroccans' solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Even when we talk about boycotts, I feel like Moroccans have truly taken it upon themselves to truly boycott all Israel-affiliated companies or conglomerates. And we can see it often on social media where influencers' comments are flooded with, don't use this product, don't go to this place because we're boycotting.
Yeah.
There are so many people who are constantly asking for BDS safe alternatives. So yeah, I think it's nice to see that our society is still just as conscious of the Palestinian cause as our predecessors.
Yeah. Speaking of BDS, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which focuses on campaigns to boycott and put pressure on Israeli-affiliated companies in order to fight for Palestinian rights and divest from Israel and put pressure on Israel to lessen and to seize their aggressions on the Strip that, again, that has been going on way before October 7.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it intensified after the events of October 7 and throughout the past 8 months. Can you explain to us the BDS boycott campaigns and the system of campaigns?
So BDS functions on a targeted boycott basis, right? So instead of just boycotting every company that you may think could have Israeli affiliations or companies that could be perceived as Israel sympathizers in a way, BDS encourages targeted boycott because that's what does the most economic damage, right?
Yeah.
If we each boycott 2 different companies, 5 different companies, it will not be as effective as if 30 million people boycott 2 companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a problem that I've been seeing recently, is that there's a lot of like mix-up when it comes to boycotting for divestment and for Palestinian rights, is that people want to boycott everything that is even
remotely affiliated with Israel.
Not even remotely, like remotely affiliated is fine, but just like suspiciously.
Yeah.
See, like even like neutral companies who have not spoken out and whatnot.
That's not very effective.
Eventually, as a consumer, you will get overwhelmed. Especially that some of the companies that are listed on the BDS for Palestine list are some of the biggest conglomerates ever. You already have a lot of products and brands to boycott. Don't overwhelm yourself and the movement by just boycotting everything that you think could be suspicious, right? On our last episode, we discussed Mawazin.
Yeah.
Our comment section was very vivid with calls to boycott the festival, right? But also a lot of our viewers asked, how is Mawazin relevant to boycotts for
Which is
Palestine?
a great question.
Amazing question, right? Scrolling through the comments, there was this one comment that really just caught my attention. One of the first people that commented on our episode encouraging people to boycott Mawazin for Palestine. When asked about how is this related to Palestine,
the why of the issue,
exactly, they responded, either it doesn't even, I don't remember the exact comment, but I'm paraphrasing here. They said, either way, we're a Muslim country, she shouldn't be here, in reference to Nicki Minaj. So this is what I'm saying, is that the way some people are approaching the boycott is...
There's a lot of mix-up.
Is very personal. Whereas a boycott is an organized, collective political act, right? And I feel like that should be at the forefront of every single person watching, is that boycotts are not just for your own... Like this type of boycott, right? If you want to boycott something because it goes against your values, you don't believe in it, you think it's wrong, good for you.
Yeah,
but
it's within your rights.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a personal freedom that you have. It's your money. It's your attention. You do with it whatever you want. However, if you are doing it for Palestine, if you are doing it for a specific cause, it has to be targeted. It has to be smart. It has to be collective. And it has to be contained.
These campaigns can have a real life effect, which I feel like they already have in very different ways. If we look, for example, at the student encampments in the US, in certain European countries, a lot of universities cut ties with Israeli institutions because of that, because of the targeted nature of the campaigns that they were getting, the targeted protests from their own student bodies, which led to, I mean, when you put pressure on a body like that, on an institution like that, eventually they will come to the table to negotiate, to discuss demands, protesters' demands, And there will be an effect, and we saw that. We saw that in Barcelona, we saw that in California, we saw it in a lot of U.S. Universities. So the point is to focus on targeted protest, targeted boycotts, and let's not be random. Let's not be messy in our actions that we can take as people, as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
You need to organize, have grassroots movements that will be effective.
Exactly. And I feel like there are different types of quote unquote activism or advocacy that we can each practice regardless of the cause. Boycotting, even sharing material on social media, which brings me to the most recent influencer. What was it? Like
the blockout,
where people just started by the millions blocking celebrities who have not spoken up in support of a ceasefire. Even, I mean, celebrities, influencers, all these people with huge platforms, and it has had amazing effects.
I mean, people had enough. It coincided with. So what happened was during the Met Gala, the night of the Met Gala, Israel decided to invade Rafah, and we were
the only safe zone
in all of Gaza,
where it told Gazans to flee to, so that then they
since
can cross
October 7th.
Since October 7th, so there was a concentration of people there.
So the Met Gala happened on the same night. Israel decided to invade Rafah. So people's timelines, whether it be on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you would get these extravagant shows of wealth, these beautiful dresses, these beautiful celebrities just living their lives on the Met Gala red carpet. And right after, horrible images coming from Rafah. Dead children, bodies on the streets. So people had enough. It was triggered by an influencer that was at the Met Gala in this beautiful, extravagant dress that used the Marie Antoinette soundbite from the Marie Antoinette movie, Let Them Eat Cake. That just triggered people. People had enough.
Also, she filmed that video in front of protesters.
Right, right. There was a protest happening at the Met Gala.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone refers to that night as the Hunger Games night for a reason, right? I mean, it was such an interesting duality that, again, the Westerners were not used to.
It's the first time they had this juxtaposition of life for the wealthy, the rich, celebrities, the white, now let's be real, and what's actually going on in the world. It was the first time they were confronted with this juxtaposition and this contrast, and it was very shocking to a lot of people. It prompted them to organize this, again, grassroots movement on the internet where people decided that, hey, this is a list of celebrities, influencers, rich people that have a platform that didn't use their platform to speak out against the current violence.
7 months.
For 7 whole months.
So this didn't happen after the first week or month.
Like they gave them a lot of time.
Too much time for
just fair. Speak out, to do something, to say something. And they just started blocking them. Like, okay, you don't want to use the platform that we gave you so that you can speak out against injustice in the world. No more platform for you.
We're taking
more likes,
power back.
No more shares, no more comments, no more engagement. Post your ads if you want to. We are not going to engage with it. You are blocked. And I mean, it really did have repercussions. Zendaya, for example, she lost 153,000 followers on Instagram, 40,000 on Twitter. Taylor Swift lost more than 200,000. A lot of celebrities really lost followers and lost some of their platform because of it. What I think is interesting is that it also bled into Morocco.
Of course it did.
It went into a lot of areas of the world. A lot of people joined the blockout party. But in Morocco, a lot of influencers started receiving comments, started getting unfollowed, blocked. And the next day, literally the next day,
everyone
saw people posting on Rafah. We saw people wearing the Palestinian scarf, kufiyya. we saw actual change in how these celebrities were approaching how they are discussing and handling the situation in Gaza.
But by then, it was clearly performative.
Yeah.
No one cared, honestly.
Yeah.
They're probably still blocked in a lot of people's accounts. I feel like this goes to show that when it comes to sort of collective action, audiences, citizens need to have almost like a tunnel vision, right? Like there should be collective, yes, but like focused and targeted action to actually have
an effect.
Yes, an important or a significant effect, a measurable one, right? And I feel like we're seeing that in every single sphere, socially, politically, humanly also, since we are now one of the main demands is obviously letting more aid into the Strip, for instance. So it's definitely why organizing is so important, and following organizers and guidelines and being part of an of a larger project is so much more important than individual action. That does not mean that small individual actions don't matter. It just means that
when they're done en masse, it
exactly
makes a difference. You can see the effect in the real world.
Exactly.
So to wrap up, the situation is still unfolding. Negotiations are currently ongoing, and we are still waiting. As of June 12th, we're still waiting to see how the proposed truce deal is going to be implemented and how this is going to hopefully lead into a permanent ceasefire.
Hopefully, we want to see a sustained support for calls in support of Palestinian statehood. We want to see mobilization, awareness, and the freedom of information to keep going. Until then, let us know what you want us to talk about next. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time.